You are listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I am Adam Young, and I am delighted to be joined today by Dr. Hillary McBride. Hillary, it's good to see you.
It is so good to see you. Thanks for having me.
You are so welcome. You're here in part because you have just written yet another book that is so important. It is titled Holy Hurt, and the subtitle is Understanding Spiritual Trauma and the Process of Healing. And we want to talk about this whole category of spiritual trauma, which your book Holy Hurt is focused on. And I guess the best place to start is, what do you mean, Hillary, when you talk about spiritual trauma?
Okay. What a pleasure to answer this question, because I think is it's worth exploring. And there might be more to get into it beyond the definition that I offer you. When I say spiritual trauma, I mean a few different things. I mean the kind of injuries, psychological, relational, existential, sometimes sexual, that people experience in association with spiritual communities, spiritual beliefs, meaning making systems. And I really like Michelle Panchuk's definition here. She says that spiritual trauma is a kind of trauma that's caused by a person or a system or a behavior or a practice closely associated with spirituality or religion, or that a person believes somehow is the end result of a religious practice, or somehow the spirituality gets intermingled into the post-traumatic psychobiological downstream effects. So there's that, which is the kind of maybe more obvious definition of this. But when I understand the definition of spirituality in general as this kind of inborn drive to make meaning, to connect, to ask questions about what it is that we're doing here, and to long for a sense of closeness with others, with ourselves, with ultimate reality, with God, I would argue that every trauma, by definition, is a form of spiritual trauma, because it fractures that ability to feel safe in our bodies. It fundamentally alters the way that we make meaning. As some people have said, trauma is not what you suffer through, it is what is unsufferable. And so the idea is that trauma, whether it's combat trauma or early childhood abuse or neglect or a natural disaster or a car accident, that when these things push our nervous system into the state of overwhelm, where we collapse, where we can no longer protect and defend ourselves, and our bodies carry the lasting legacy and impact of having been in such utter danger that something inside of us either thought we would die or did die, there is no way that spirituality is untouched.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you, not right at the beginning, but towards the beginning of Holy Hurt, you get into really specifically talk about 5 factors that contribute to spiritual trauma. And they all start with the letter C. We don't have time to get into all of them, but I do want to talk about 2 of these factors. And the 2 I want to talk about are consequences and compliance. So here's a sentence that you write about consequences. You say, given how central wishing to belong is to our sense of well-being, and boy, it sure is, to belong is so core to what it means to be human. Given how central wishing to belong is to our sense of well-being, consequences often center on the loss of belonging. That's what you write. Now, can you just unpack that a little bit, Hillary?
Mm-hmm. Well, first I'll start by saying the 5 C's that I come up with in the book are a way of explaining how is it that we can stay in systems that hurt us so badly, that fracture something to our core. And so to understand the consequences and the compliance is really to understand how do we stay? Why do we stay in a way that undoes our shame? So the consequences, and said in another way, are often threats. These are experiences that we have of meeting the limitations that our community puts on us, and says in doing so, if you do not do what we tell you to, here are all the things that you will lose, and here are all the bad things that will happen. Now, you might be able to argue that these are things that people actually believe will happen in these communities when you have leaders who are, depending on their theological framework, depending on their doctrine, may actually believe that people should be removed from community or removed from the love of God or something to that nature. But we could also take a more sinister, or look at it from a kind of more sinister angle, and suggest that perhaps this has been a really useful strategy, a manipulative strategy that some communities have made use of in order to terrify people of what it would be like to be without one of their fundamental human needs, which is belonging and connection. Of course, it's worth saying here that the threats in some cases will never happen, right? That there is nothing actually that could ever separate us from the love of God. But in some cases, the threats really do happen, that people are punished relationally, they're publicly shamed, they're rejected. In some cases, people are completely dismissed from their family of origin, as well as their social community around them. And so the stakes are really high. And what that does is it makes us really easy to control. It makes it easier for us to even silence the places inside of us that say, this doesn't feel good. Because the threat of losing something, whether it's an actual thing that's, an actual loss that we'll experience, or the threat of one that's made up, it can feel as real to us as any other kind of, having our limb cut off in a way. When we lose belonging, the fabric of our being gets fractured.
Yes. Yes. Louis Cozolino, a neuroscientist that I read often, emphasizes that we are so social in the core of our limbic brain. Like, to be human is to need to belong. And so the consequence or the threat of expulsion from the group, it like goes to the deepest part of the human heart. And that's what you're talking about in that section. Okay, let's shift to compliance. I know we're moving fast, but such is the nature of the podcast medium. Here's what you write about compliance. Compliance can be powerful for creating a sense of belonging. And there it is again. As the adage goes, we go along to get along. But the cost, you say, Hillary, is agency, the sense of a robust, intact self with opinions, intuition, and autonomy. People may be told the self is undesirable, and to be spiritually mature, they must, quote unquote, die to self. Now, oh my gosh, I mean, it was like you were in my world 15 years ago. Like this was the language that was used for me. So there's so much in this short paragraph, but can you walk us through, Hillary, why is this point you're making about compliance so important, and how does compliance create a sense of belonging?
It's really helpful to see this from the outside, because when we're living it, it's hard to put a finger on the way that the slow erosion of our sense of self, the little subtle things that we do to disconnect from our bodily knowing, from our intuition, from the clarity that we have that something doesn't feel good, being able to see these patterns from the outside can help us in a way kind of see behind the curtain, or I imagine like a Wizard of Oz phenomena where we get to see all the levers and the pulleys. But it's a really interesting strategic move to keep people disconnected from the places inside of them that know what they want.
Yes.
That know what's good, and then more specifically, that know what's dangerous. And of course, all of that happens on a bodily level, the instinctual reality, the interoceptive cues that tell us this doesn't feel safe. And when people are disconnected from that, and they have allegedly a good reason to be disconnected from that, again, not only does it make them easy to control, but it allows people to outsource their decision-making authority to somebody else. Not only are we deprived of autonomy and then agency, kind of the ability to act, but we defer to somebody else who then can continue to reinforce to us that we're bad, that there's something inside of us that tells us we're in danger, or this doesn't feel good, that shouldn't be trusted. So there's this interesting loop that can happen between a person and the outsourced reasoning, authority, structure, leaders, which is that that they continue to loop back messages that suggest what is happening inside of me needs to be disavowed. And the irony here, it's such a strange thing to finally be able to see from the outside, is that often in these contexts, the people who are considered the most spiritually mature are the people who have really significant impaired psychosocial development. Right? It is a task of development to differentiate, to think for oneself, to be able to say to someone, no, I don't agree, and to know that you're safe and loved and can hold your no and can still be in relationship with people around you. And so we're given these really fractured, infantile, repressed versions of an adult self, and they're held up as being spiritually mature, superior in a way. These are the leaders in our communities. You have died to yourself. Look at what a prize you are. Look at how well you're doing at this thing. So there's the paradox of that is that people really are left without the skills to know what's happening inside of them, to trust what's happening inside of them, to believe that they are good, to believe that even the messages that say something is off can be trusted, which feeds back into some of the earlier C's. It's much, much easier to control people then.
So this whole category, it's impossible, I think, to talk about spiritual trauma apart from talking really candidly and clearly about the self. And you have a quote here that I want to read that is so important about the self. And this is what you write. In religious and family environments that are governed by fear and control, some of the normal things that need to happen to help kids grow into healthy selves don't get to happen. Okay? That's how you start. And then you say this: if development is about becoming more of oneself, and in these environments the self is considered untrustworthy, sinful, or an obstacle to spiritual maturity, then these environments and the people in them will often do whatever they can to eradicate or impair the development and expression of the self. Now, this is just, I know that's a lot of words, but it's such an important paragraph. Can you tell us, let me just summarize what I hear you paraphrasing. What I hear you saying is, if development is about becoming more and more the unique Adam that I was created to be, and if I have been taught by my community that my Adamness is untrustworthy or sinful or an obstacle to spiritual maturity, then we've got big problems when it comes to healthy human development.
Well, I would argue, I think this is what we're saying, the same thing. You cannot have healthy human development. And where we end up seeing that clinically is people who have come out of these religious contexts or these spiritual communities without some of the basic skills for living. Because if we think about development as, yes, there's like circularity to it for sure, and there are some elements of linearity. We don't do taxes before we learn our ABCs, right? We don't learn to set really big, heavy boundaries with challenging relational dynamics before we've had someone else show us that it's okay for us to have a little no about a little thing and have that be okay. So people, when we think about the emergence of the self occurring through the lifespan, often in these socio-cultural contexts of high control and high demand, these religious and spiritual environments, we're seeing that from a very, very, very young age. The tiny little things that actually are a part of becoming the self are snuffed out and shamed, and the label that there is put on them is sin.
Right.
And when we superimpose a psychological lens onto that, particularly as the developmentalist, I think about the developmental psychology, what we see is that there is impaired growth, which means that people get to a certain stage in life and have not done some of the preliminary tasks to be able to then hold the weight and the demands of living that come with midlife or come with marriage or come with parenting. And it can all feel like this house of cards inside.
Yes. And I want to read one more excerpt where I want to push this point about the goodness of the self, about the goodness of the human heart. You have this phrase where you write about our core state. And you say that our core state of a human being is our wired in default setting as humans. And you say it is calm, clear, connected, compassionate, courageous, creative, coherent, and collaborative. And then you write this. This might be revolutionary to hear when we have been told over and over that we are wired as bad from the start. It might, you understand your reader. You understand me as I was reading it. You say it might grate against the deeply lodged belief that we are utterly unacceptable and unlovable. I, Hillary McBride, you write, am here to tell you that from a scientific, psychological, and research-informed perspective, this is not the case. You were born good. We are all born good. I believe it is a form of spiritual and psychological abuse to be told that our fundamental nature, the core of who we are, is bad. Now, maybe a little bit of a curveball, because I don't want you to necessarily expand on what you've written as much as this, Hillary. What would you like to say to the listener who's thinking, okay, that sounds awesome, but I'm not sure I believe that I was born good?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I have lots of experience responding to that because even for people who have come to a kind of intellectual understanding of, well, I believe other people are good, or I believe like I've had a baby. How could this baby be born bad? It can again, like I say in the text, it can grate against this fundamental story that has been so wired in and rehearsed over and over and over again. So of course there's all sorts of therapeutic things that I would say that come to mind first, like I'm feeling so sad that is the story that you were handed.
Yes.
Right? Like that's my first instinct and the first thing that I want to say. And how wrong. I'm so sorry. Because that's truly the thing that we need to connect with. There's an injury here. And when the injury has gone unnamed and when the injury has been celebrated, right, which is often what happens in these contexts, is that not only is this the assumption, but you're good for buying in to this, to be able to say, this is a thing that has hurt you. This has done damage, and we can actually call this abuse, is a way to reify the significance of the wound and how far they have come from the things that are true about themselves, right? How far the stories about them are from the truth of who they are. So there's those pieces. I mean, sometimes I think it's also important to think about the listeners or the clients or the friends or whomever who really appeal to scripture and theology to say, well, we actually have pretty good evidence in biblical scripture to suggest that Genesis 1 comes before Genesis 3, right? That there is this, actually, it's not an agreed upon doctrine within the church, like the capital C church. There are long traditions that go back as far as the beginning of these sacred texts, which suggest actually we are creation itself, and creation is the primary incarnation, that we are more like Christ than not. So we can argue sometimes from the Bible, and we can look at neuroscience. Sometimes it's helpful to bring in different, like scientific arguments to say like, well, here's actually the thing that we know is true. But I think that the two things that come back to me the most here are, one, the story that we were told the most about ourselves is the one that feels the most true.
Yes.
Not actually the one that is the most true. And our names are a really good example of that. Am I fundamentally Hillary? Well, my parents tell me all the time that there were two other names that they had picked for me. And sometimes we joke about that, like try it on there. Like Michelle was one, Alexandra was one. And we say like, oh, wouldn't it feel funny if like someone just started calling me Alexandra or Michelle? Like wow, that feels weird in my body. And yet it could have just as easily been my name. But because they called me Hillary over and over and over, and I practiced it over and over and over, it's the name that feels like home for me. So that's the truth about how our brains develop. The second thing is that I think there's always a part inside of us that we can leverage, like a place of inner knowing that believes something different. And sometimes it starts with believing something different about somebody else, or maybe even getting angry at the story that we were told, or maybe starting to feel like, we can work with a version of us, almost if we, I like to picture a matryoshka doll, the Russian stacking dolls, where we have this, like, the largest, wisest, grown up version on the outside, and then the teeniest, tiniest little one on the inside, like turning towards that little version inside and saying, like, oh, that version of you heard this story so much that they believed it's true. And I wonder what it would be like for us to go be with that version of you who had to believe that to belong. Which brings us back to the compliance piece that we talked about earlier. Like, that version had to believe it. There was no other choice. There was no other way, because it was the water they were swimming in. And what would it be like for us to go meet them and to begin to give them a new name?
Yes. And I know I imagine you would agree with this, but I just want to say that if you're listening and it's hard for you, like you wrote it might grate on you to be told that you are good. If like that is reasonable. That makes sense. Like,
Yes.
it has taken me years to realize that when Genesis 2 writes about the creation of humanity and says very good, like, it's taken me years to realize that applies to my heart. That very good applies to Adam.
That's right.
So if it's hard for you to metabolize what Hillary's saying, I just want to say that makes sense and that's reasonable.
So compassionate. Yeah, it can make sense that what we believe is both untrue and feels familiar,
Yes.
and hearing something else feels painful, even if it is true.
Yes.
That can all exist at the same time.
Yes. And it can feel disorienting. Okay, a little bit of a shift, because one of my favorite parts of your book is the way you talk about the process of recovery or healing. And you have this sentence, it's super short, and it just like leapt off the page to me. You say, we have defined healing as something going away. I read that and I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want my pain to go. That's what healing is, Hillary, my pain going away. But I kept reading, and this is what you say. Instead, healing is the ability to attend to whatever is hurting. Now, boy, is that different. To turn toward where the injuries are, you continue, and patiently, with courage and clarity, let them be loved, and eventually to love them ourselves as they are. This means we are in relationship with the wounds we carry, even as they are wide open, telling the story for as long as necessary about how much pain we endured and what caused it. This does not mean we love what happened. This is about our relationship with ourself. Okay, that's what you write. So let's just slow this down. First, I'd like you to say a little bit, Hillary, about your opening sentence from that paragraph. We have defined healing as something going away.
Yeah. I want to preface this by saying that this was the hardest part of the entire book to write. Because healing is a term that has been so weaponized in spiritual communities that to even use the word itself feels risky and dangerous. And in a sense, I understand how confrontive that where I go can be. And yet I think that the sentence that healing, we've defined it as something going away, is part of our cultural assumption as it's been layered with these kind of spiritual strategies, maybe the rhetoric around total and complete deliverance, healing, depending on what denominations you have been a part of. The idea is that when something is resolved, it is no more.
Yes.
It disappears. And yet, when I understand what healing is, I think of it as in some ways the opposite of what wounds, like the equal opposite action. And what is it that wounds? Well, something separates, something fragments, something is against, right? If we can look at that as being true on a biophysiological level as well, that there is something that is working against, or something that has been separated. It's not in right relationship, which allows us to then scale this and say, wow, I don't actually know if I can do healing on my own. Because if I still believe that I am all on my own and I have to get it right all on my own, then I'm still living in the fragmentation of a worldview that told me that I am not connected to my neighbor and to the land and to like everybody and everything. So I see if healing is if injuries or wounds are about separating, fragmenting, opposition, like fracture,
Mm-hmm.
then actually the opposite is relationship, connection. And it's really the only way that I can make sense of a definition of healing that allows us to not fall into ableist ideas, that allows us to honor the way that the memories of the pain endure, even if they're different now,
Mm-hmm.
right? As
Mm-hmm.
a trauma survivor, I don't actually think that we can ever get rid of the memories, nor would we want to on some level. How dishonoring of ourselves to lose the thing that shaped us the most, or one of the things that shaped us the most. So how is it that we can build a broader, wider understanding of healing that allows something of what hurt us to remain? And the only way that I can think about that is if it's not about making it disappear, but it's about being in relationship with it differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which brings us to the section of your book where you talk about this fact that we are a multiplicity of selves. Like there is no unitary atom. There are lots of parts of atom. And over the last couple of years, I have gotten to know in much more depth these various parts of me. And you talk about that, and then you write this. In the midst of all those voices, all the different parts of me, you say, there is a part of you that knows how to witness. This is the part of you that comes out when you feel like the very best version of yourself. Even if that part feels pushed to the very back of the choir, I know this to be true. It exists and cannot be taken from you, especially if you have survived trauma. This wise, youest you is there, is yours, and can never be destroyed. Now, what do you mean, Hillary? So I first heard about this through Dick Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems. But what do you mean, Hillary, when you say there's an atom, a core self in me that can never be destroyed and that knows how to witness the other parts of Adam?
Mm-hmm. I pull from nature when I think about that. And in ADP, which is one of my main theoretical frameworks, we talk about something called the transformational drive. And the transformational drive is the something inside of us that kind of like the plant, the potted plant that you have sitting on your windowsill, bends towards the light.
Yeah.
There is something in nature that knows how to twist and turn and reach and stretch and expand and open to express, to move into the world and to get what it needs. And because of our relational nature, I would say, just like plants, that there is something inside of us that knows how to be in connection with everything inside of us and around us. That it is a fundamental feature of creation, of nature itself, to be aware of all of the mutualism, to be aware of all of the multiplicity. Sometimes aware looks a little different on the human frontier than it does on the plant animal frontier, but I think it helps me to remember that although we might have some more sophisticated stories we like to tell about ourselves, we are actually part of the family of living things that already knows how to do this. And it allows us to trust ourselves. Again, like I've gotten really into post-humanist philosophy lately, and to think about the way that nature actually returns me to myself in a way that myself is not seen as distinct from everything around me. That I am full of all of the DNA of my ancestors and the same air that the trees breathed just moments ago, and the plant life that gave itself to nourish my body, that we are multiplicity in ways that we sometimes forget, again, because of, I would say, a core spiritual wound in our culture, a spiritual trauma in our culture that has propelled us to believe that we're separate in ways that we're not. But to be able to say that this core us inside knows how to witness is kind of like saying it's an instinctual, it's part of our evolution and our instinctual wiring to be able to hold and nurture and see and to be able to be with without
Yes.
trying to fix or change. The same way that there's an apple tree in my yard that is maybe my greatest pastor right now. This apple tree is teaching me things I feel like about motherhood and parenthood, but it's like the feeling of resting my spine against her spine and how she holds me and in a way sees without trying to change anything about. But as we get to know each other, my spine on her bark, there is a sense of I thou that is happening there that not only humanizes the tree, but humanizes me and everything inside of me.
One of the things you talk about that's very common when it comes to spiritual trauma is this idea of spiritual bypassing.
Mm.
What does that mean, and why does it matter in this context?
Yeah. Spiritual bypassing is probably, oh man, as soon as I describe it, I don't know if a single person listening to this, whether you grew up in the church or not, who won't know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's a way that we get away from what's hard by using spiritual language or theology or practices that essentially, yeah, just cut us off from the inner reality, that cut us off usually from what's painful. I mean, I have like a handful at the ready. God won't give you more than you can handle, right? Praying it away, right? It's a blessing from God that you had this cancer because now you can use it for your ministry. Like just all of the horrific things that we say that diminish people's experience, their lived experience of pain and suffering, and our own experience of pain and suffering by putting this really nice packaging on it. But ultimately what it does is it cuts us off from what's inside. It cuts us off from two things: the pain, the fear, right? All of the hard stuff, but it also cuts us off from that core place inside of us that we get access to when we stay with the hard long enough. Our bodies instinctually know how to return to rest, ease, connection, compassion, a sense of clarity. All of that is on the other side, but we can't ever get access to it when we're bypassing our way out of the hard stuff. So again, what happens is we live these lives of spiritual bypassing, every once in a while dipping underneath them to touch the pain. And then that becomes proof that what's inside of us is bad, right? When we touch in on the pain and we touch in on the discomfort and how we were never allowed to feel it and it shouldn't be there and it's totally overwhelming and we're wildly dysregulated, and then maybe we do things like behave in a certain way or reach for a substance or think of something to manage that distress. Again, it's all just used as proof for our badness, which keeps reinforcing the bypassing strategies.
Yes, and the alternative that you keep offering as a way forward in your book, Holy Hurt, is being with, and in particular, being with our emotions. And I want to read, this is the final excerpt that I'll read. This is what you write about processing emotions. You say processing emotions, as opposed to spiritual bypassing, might seem confusing at first if you never learned how to do this growing up or were told your emotions are harmful. But avoiding and suppressing emotions are what harm us, not the emotions themselves. When we learn how to feel and allow the feelings to move through our bodies in the way they naturally want to, they actually pass. They come like waves rolling in and building until they crest and then settle on the other side. Experiencing them, you write, allows them to move through. Now, as you listen to your words, what comes up for you? Why is it so important to learn how to be with our emotions, Hillary?
Mm-hmm. What comes up for me is thinking about the wisdom of our bodies, thinking about how our bodies have this innate pathway to organize things that are hard, and that's been given to us, that's actually part of our created nature, that it is actually such a good and right thing. And I think the distress I feel around it is the sadness and the anger that we were ever convinced otherwise, that we have these systems like androcentric, patriarchal, colonial, that just all sorts of systems that have disconnected us from our bodies and made us believe that our bodies were the place of sin and danger, when really actually our bodies can tell us so much about our creator. They can tell us so much about how we are like everything in nature and everyone around us. So it's really important for living. And I mean, I could just take the conversation slightly to the left, a little detour, and say most of our stress related disorders are connected to mind body processes. Right? Most of the things, I think the number is close to 80% of things that bring people to their family doctor that require some medical treatment are psychophysiological things that are happening as a result of unfelt feeling or distress in the body. Stress is connected to the feeling circuitries. And so I think it's really important to just honor that part of the evidence here, that our bodies have ways of saying, through distress, through pain, through illness, through disease, through disorder, hey, you're not doing as a culture the thing that you need to do to stay well. And when we do it, what I love about feeling and connecting to our bodies is, as I mentioned earlier, it actually connects us back to the goodness inside. That when we stay with the feeling, I actually think we can care better for each other. We can care more sustainably. We have more pleasurable, satisfying lives. We have capacity, right? We have capacity to face and help and mend for others.
Thank you. Okay, we've covered lots of terrain, and your book covers far more. The book is called Holy Hurt, but one of the other things that I want to do before I let you go, Hillary, is invite you listeners to a conference that Hillary and I are doing on this very topic of spiritual trauma. It's coming up Saturday, June 7th, and the title of the conference is Spiritual Trauma, What It Is and How to Heal. If you are interested in exploring these topics and the content of Holy Hurt in more depth, you can sign up at adamyoungcounseling.com. The cost of the conference is $129. And here's what I really want to say. If you've experienced spiritual or religious trauma, or if you have a sense that that might be part of your story, please consider joining us, because your body deserves care and support. Your story deserves to be witnessed by you and by others. So more info on the conference is available on my homepage. Just go to adamyoungcounseling.com. We would love for you to join us. We will be going into much more depth on all of these categories that are related to spiritual trauma. Hillary, thank you for authoring Holy Hurt. It is available anywhere you can get books. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And I will say, as my parting words, I hope everyone has the pleasure of having you, sir, Adam Young, read their words back to them, because there is something so profound about the way you, with such heart and gravitas, hear the things that matter most. It made me feel like, oh, that's why I wrote it. So thank you for the gift of reading me my words.
Oh, you're welcome. It was a delight to have you and to be with you tonight. Good night, everyone.